I'm going to start off by probably breaking all of the rules of public speaking. I'm going to offer you an apology to begin with. I more than likely will run a little bit long today, and the reason is that I originally told you this was going to be a 5-part series. And for my own spiritual sanity, for lack of a better word, I've had to cut it down to 4. I've been living with this information for about 1.5 years now. It wakes me up about 2 o'clock in the morning. You need to phrase this way. You need to phrase that way. And I need to get into something that's a little bit lighter, and I think you'll understand a little later on, a little as we go along. Just to give you a quick review, we started off putting all of this in context, and the context that we had is this is a continuation of the war in heaven that's talked about in Revelation 12. And the angels in heaven rejoiced when Satan was thrown out, but a warning was given to the earth that he was being cast down here. Woe unto the earth. Then the next time we got together, we looked at how could this happen? A country that was founded on Christian principles with all of the freedoms that we have built in. And we're going to review the prophecy at the end today. How could it happen? And it's because we found that, as our scripture reading said this morning, the house has been swept clean. Less and less people in America today are claiming Christianity in their homes, down to the point that if we looked at the 20 to 24 demographic, less than 50% of the people in that demographic claim Christianity in their home. Then last time we were together, we talked about the possessor, Baal, and how Baal, the anti-God, worked his way into American and Western society. Today we're going to talk about 2 additional beings that we're going to put into our discussion. We'll start off calling them, and I'll give you their names in a couple of minutes. We're going to start by calling them the Seductress / Transformer and the Destroyer. Now, I have to admit to you that I've been very apprehensive to bring this information in. And the reason I have is it's going to sound very much like I'm trying to move into the realm of politics. And I'm not. And it suddenly hit me about 3 months ago. We were celebrating Becky's birthday. We took the entire family out to dinner. And while we were sitting at dinner at this long table down both sides, my son-in-law happened to be sitting right next to me. Now, he used to do a lot of magic shows for kids. And he was trying to teach one of our grandsons one of his tricks with a coin. And he said something that about 2 or 3 days later struck me. He looked across at him and he said, the key to this, it's an illusion. And the key to this is to distract people with this hand over here while you're making it work with this hand over here so that it suddenly looks like it appears magically. A couple days later, it hit me. This is exactly what Satan does. He gets us so distracted with the politics of issues that we forget to watch God's creation and the perfection of God's creation. And he slides these things in and gets us totally distracted so that we forget what's going on. As I said last time, we looked at Baal, but Baal never comes alone. If we look at this, the Bible tells us they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the people around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Now, I even asked a few people when I knew that I was coming up to ask them, I said, have you ever studied into Ashtaroth? Do you have any idea who Ashtaroth is? And most of the time, the response I got was no. Now, I've used several sources as we're going into this, but my first source that I went and looked at the Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary for that text and looked up to see who was Ashtaroth. According to the Bible commentary, this goddess was also known by the name Astarte. In Babylonia, she was called Ishtar. Surprisingly enough, the correct pronunciation of Ishtar from Babylonia is Easter. And we just celebrated that a couple of weeks ago, but that is the correct pronunciation. You've probably heard of the fact that the bunnies and the chocolate eggs and all that are pagan. They actually are. And it doesn't really have anything to do with Christ's death and resurrection. When we celebrated it, you never found mention of the other thing. We celebrated the death and the resurrection of Christ. But it is pronounced Easter. She was the goddess of sexual love, maternity, and fertility. In the Ras Shamra tablets, she appears also as a goddess of war and the chase. Her worship was widespread all over the Near Eastern world, from Moab to Babylonia. She was worshipped in Canaan in the days of Abraham. Saul's armor was placed as a trophy by the Philistines in her temple at Bethshan. Solomon paid homage to her in his heyday. The numerous female figurines found by archaeologists in Hebrew and Canaanite dwellings are thought to be representations of her in her role as Mother Goddess. And I tried to look up a picture of it, and I will tell you, I could not find a picture of Ashtaroth that I felt was appropriate to put on a screen in God's house. So I did not bring any pictures of it. In the Old Testament, the names Baal and Ashtaroth are used almost synonymously for all the false gods and goddesses of Palestine. In the turning away, first comes Baal, then comes Ashtaroth. Israel first turned to Baal and then to Ashtaroth. Baal leads to Ashtaroth. As we will see a little later in our discussion, this same pattern is repeated in America and the Western world. Ashtaroth was so important among the gods of the ancient Middle East that she was given the title Queen of Heaven. She was joined to the celestial lights, to the moon, which some of her mythologies name as her father, and to the sun, which was often named as her brother. But there's one other celestial light with which she is best known: Venus. She was also the goddess of war and destruction. She was fiery, impetuous, impulsive, greedy, emotional, demanding, stormy, fierce, carnal, given to rage, romantic, vindictive, full of unbridled passion, insatiable sexual desire, and boundless pride. In many cultures, she was also the goddess of prostitution. The prostitutes of Mesopotamia looked to her as their patron and protector. This influence seems to be a constant problem for the Israelites. Again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. They served the Baals and Ashtoreths and the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, and the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistine, Judges 10:6. Many years had passed since Gideon had stemmed the widespread apostasy and broke the Midianite oppression. Now the people turned in large numbers toward idolatry again. 7 heathen deities are listed as constituting the new objects of worship. These were the deities of the people bordering Israel on all sides. The number and distribution revealed that there was a mass turning to idolatry. Ashtoreth's cult reflected her nature. Her worship was saturated with carnality, sensuality, and open sexuality. Ancient writings speak of her temples as akin to houses of prostitution. It is believed that every year on the 10th day of the Mesopotamian New Year's festival, the Babylonian kings would perform ritual sex acts in her temple. Whether these acts involved the consummation of union or whether a symbolic form of union is still being debated to this day. This would take place through the goddess's high priestess, who would act as her surrogate. Her ritualized temple sex was not confined to kings and high priestesses. According to the writings of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the women of Babylon were compelled by religious custom to sit in the temples of the goddess and perform the function of prostitutes, having relations with a stranger in exchange for money. According to Herodotus, every woman in the land was compelled to perform the act at least once in her life. Ashtaroth's proclivity to flout conventions and break rules would make her the goddess of those on the fringes of society. How could Ashtaroth gain entrance into the Western civilizations, and more specifically, into America? Looking back to the last time we were together, we tracked the entrance of Baal, or the god of apostasy, into America. In this case, the god of apostasy would lead to the goddess of sexual licentiousness and debauchery. If America's turning from God began to manifest in the early 1960s, and with it, the entrance of Baal, we would then expect this to be followed by the entrance of Ashtaroth. What would happen in the wake of that entrance? We would expect a transformation to begin that would alter the realm of sexuality. With the goddess's entrance, we would expect biblical standards and ethics surrounding sexuality and marriage to begin to erode. We would expect moral foundations and values that had undergirded Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years to begin overturning. In short, we would expect there to be a revolution in the realm of sexuality, a sexual revolution. Many times we hear the phrase, history repeats itself. In this case, that is exactly what happened. There was a previous sexual revolution. It took place in the 1st century AD in the Greco-Roman world. It was the revolution by which biblical ethics, ideals, and morality replaced those of the pagan world. It happened at the same time that the pagan gods were pushed out of Western civilizations. In America and Western culture of the mid-20th century, sexuality was seen as a sacred domain of marriage, and marriage as sacred and a lifelong covenant of love between a husband and wife. These values were largely the same as they had been in ancient times at the advent of Christianity. Sex outside of marriage, whether premarital or extramarital, was seen as sin. Divorce was frowned upon. If a woman became pregnant before marriage, she and the child's father were expected to marry. The divorce rate was minuscule, so was the percentage of people living together outside of marriage, as was the rate of children born out of wedlock. If the goddess were to return, it would mean that pagan sexual values would now overturn biblical ones. In other words, the sexual revolution that took place in America and Western civilization in the late 20th century was reversing the sexual revolution that took place in ancient times. When Israel turned away from God, sex in the form of the goddess Ashtaroth was deified. Sex became a god. Sex thus became an end and a goal to be pursued in and of itself. Therefore, it could now be divorced from marriage or any other context and be followed with no regard for context or any other thing. When the spirit of Ashtaroth came to America, the same dynamics began to replay. Sexuality became deified. And so began the progressive severing of sexuality from marriage. As Israel worshiped and served the goddess of sexuality, so now America, indwelled by the same spirit and the same goddess, became increasingly obsessed with sex. The effect of Ashtaroth's return to the modern world was the progressive undermining and weakening of marriage. As sexuality was glorified as an end in and of itself, marriage was eroded. As Ashtaroth had pursued relationship after relationship, so America began doing the same. As the taboo against ending one's marriage began to end, so did marriages. Under the spirit of Ashtaroth, divorce became an epidemic, and America was filled with broken homes. As it was Ashtaroth's nature to choose sexual pleasure and romance over commitment, more and more Americans did likewise. They slept with each other, lived with each other, but would not commit to each other. Marriage as a lifelong covenant was increasingly viewed as an unnecessary constraint. What was once fornication now became premarital relations, and in time, the norm. The number of Americans living together without marriage and the number of children born out of wedlock or without fathers would skyrocket. Ashtaroth had another side, another power, another agenda. And it would be from this, her other side, that the transformation of American and world culture would be taken to a new stage and a new level. Ashtaroth was a sorceress. She was known for her powers to alter people's affections, passions, and thoughts, and at times, their essence. If the sexual revolution was the first of her renewed works, there would be a second. The second, though connected to the first, would open up a different realm. It would alter human desire and human identity and human nature itself. A concept that had never before existed in human history was invented to coincide with this metamorphosis. It was called gender identity. By this, it was now possible to divorce oneself from one's biological being. Everyone was now told that they possessed a gender or sexual identity that could very well be opposite of what they were born as, contrary to their biological gender. The young were especially vulnerable, as it was their elders and teachers telling them that this was in fact the truth. The seeds were planted for boys to wonder if they were girls and girls if they were boys. Dresses, they were told, were for boys and girls. Girls could be princes and boys could be princesses. Age-old fairy tales now had to be altered in order to ensure that princes no longer rescued princesses, and that the princesses now possessed a sufficient number of masculine attributes. Ashtaroth was continually praised for her power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Implicit in the changing of sexuality is the changing of desire. A man transformed into a woman would presumably now desire men. A woman changed into a man would presumably desire women. This brings us to the realm of altered desire. If sexuality could be removed from the context of marriage, as in the sexual revolution, then it could be removed from the context of gender. We are all very familiar with the text in the Bible that says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. But right after that is another text, and many times this one happens to be overlooked. I didn't make a slide for this one, but I will read it to you. It's found in Luke 17, verses 28 and 29. It was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. When we think of the story of Lot, and as we've grown up through Christian education and everything else, we're told the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but usually it centers around the end of the story. It centers around the fact that they were told not to look back. And Lot's wife, fleeing the city when the fire and brimstone comes down, she turns around and looks back and turns to a pillar of salt. But what we don't focus on is the beginning of that story. The beginning of that story actually started in Abraham's camp. We're told that Abraham was sitting outside his tent one day, and he looked off on the horizon, and he sees three men coming at him. He goes out to meet them, to invite them in for some refreshment, and he realizes that one of them is Christ. The other two are angels. When they get back to his tent and he gives them the refreshments, Jesus tells him about the destruction of Sodom and why it is to occur. Abraham decides that he's going to negotiate. And he first comes up, he said, look, if you can find 20 righteous people in Sodom, will you not destroy it? He said, okay, I won't destroy it if you find 20. So then Abraham's like, well, maybe not. There might not be that many. So how about 10? Jesus goes, okay, if we can find 10 righteous people, I won't destroy it. Abraham's still not quite so sure. And he goes, how about 5? If we can find 5 righteous people in Sodom, will you save the city? Jesus goes, okay, for 5, I will save the city. About that time, the 2 angels leave and they head towards Sodom. Jesus stays, and it's in that meeting that he actually gives Abraham the promise of a son. Even though Sarah's already 90 years old, he gives him that promise. The 2 angels go down the road, down onto the plain, and if you remember at one time, Lot was Abraham's nephew, and they lived together until they got to a point that their flocks and herds got so big, they had to separate. And Abraham, even though he was the senior and should have had the choice, he gave it to Lot. Lot chose to go down onto the plain, and Abraham stayed in the hills. So they come down off from the hills, they're coming down the road. Lot is sitting out by the city gate, and he sees these 2 men approaching. Now, even though Lot is a follower of God, he knows what the city is like, and he goes out to meet them, and he invites them to come to his home. Their initial reaction was, no, we'll stay here. And he tells them it's not safe. You need to come to my home. He insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? In the King James Version, it says, for they are very fire. In the New International Version, it finishes the text, bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Genesis 19, 3-5. While attending a Michigan Law Enforcement Officer Training Council Academy to learn to be a police officer, one of the things we had to do in our classes was study law, so that we knew what the compiled statutes were and what the laws were. There was a law in place in 1973. It was a felony. It carried a 5-year penalty. The crime was called sodomy. It was named after Sodom. That's where the name came from. It carried a penalty of 5 years in the state penitentiary. It would all come to a head, though, in 1969. On a summer night on the streets of New York City. In the Greenwich Village area of New York City was a gay bar called the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn, like several of the others, was owned by the mafia, and they were raided periodically because they would fail to get the appropriate licenses for selling liquor and for the shows that they would put on. Now, the mafia had arrangements with the New York City Police Department that usually when one of these raids was planned, they would be notified and they would get rid of most of the illegal activity, so when the raid came through, nothing would happen. But on this particular night, apparently they were not notified. The police came, they raided the Stonewall Inn. They went inside. There were about 200 patrons inside the bar. They weren't really concerned with them. What they were more concerned with was the bartenders and the cross-dressers who were putting on the show inside the bar. They ushered the patrons out, and then they started getting identities and started making arrests. As they were taking the people out of the bar that they had arrested to try and get them to their transport vehicle, the patrons of the bar started to become very agitated. They started throwing rocks and bottles, and in some cases even bricks, at the police. It got so bad that the New York City police officers that were on that raid had to turn around and flee back into the bar and barricade the doors for their own safety. They called for assistance. Assistance finally came, and they were brought out of it. They were brought out of there with their prisoners. But that incident would lead to days of rage and violence and would trigger a new movement and a cultural transformation. 5 months after Stonewall, gay activists met in Philadelphia and planned a march to commemorate the Stonewall uprising to take place the following summer in New York City. It was to be repeated every year on the last Sunday of June. 3 other marches were planned for that same weekend, one in San Francisco, one in Chicago, and one in Los Angeles on Hollywood Boulevard, all of them to occur at the exact same time. On June 28, 1970, the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, the participants gathered in Greenwich Village near Stonewall to begin the march. Beginning with a few hundred participants, the march proceeded up 6th Avenue, where it swelled to a few thousand before reaching its destination at Central Park. As planned, the parade would be repeated every summer as an annual observance. With each passing year, more marches would be held in more cities across America and then around the world. They would be named Gay Liberation Marches, then Gay Pride Marches, then finally Pride Parades. They all took place at the same time of the year to commemorate the uprising that brought them into existence. Soon, what was established as marches and parades by gay activists to celebrate homosexuality became a whole week, Gay Pride Week. Then, Gay Pride Month. To increase its acceptability and further popularize it, its name would later be shortened to Pride Month. It was a strange phenomenon, the celebrating of that which once occupied the forbidden corners of society had come to permeate and dominate American and Western culture. America and other nations of the West were now devoting an entire month to honor, praise, and celebrate a form of sexuality that a little while earlier had been nearly universally viewed as a form of immorality or even a crime. Now it was being treated as sacred. As with many other things, Satan tends to pervert things that God has given to distract us from his promises. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life." Genesis 9:12 through 15. First flown on June 25, 1978, one sign above all others has come to represent the movement that started at Stonewall: the sign of the rainbow. In 1984, the sign of the rainbow was adopted as the official symbol of gay pride. It soon became the ubiquitous symbol of the movement and all it represented, flown and recognized all over the world. Returning to Ashtaroth's other power, the power to alter sexual behaviors and the destruction of the traditional family, puts in context the entrance of the third pagan god, one that we will call the Destroyer. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. 1 Kings 11:7. So who is Molech? Not only did Solomon allow his heart to be drawn out after these heathen gods, but he went so far as to establish centers for their worship. Infatuated with the beauty of his heathen wives, he was led to unite with them in their idol worship. Molech was another aspect of Baal. An exceedingly detestable feature of his worship was the cruel burning of children in the fire. Nevertheless, Solomon established a shrine for his worship, This was in the valley of Hinnom that's mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. They've uncovered statues of Molech over in that particular area. And every one of the pictures of the statues of Molech that I've found, he's sitting on a throne with his arms extended, the forearms pointing down like this, with the hands turned this way. He was made that way so that when the little children would be brought as a sacrifice and laid on his arms, they would slide off into the fires in the valley of Hinnom. So horrifying was the nature of the god Molech and his worship that he is called the abomination. The earliest of scriptural mentions of Molech warns of the evil associated with that name. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Leviticus 18:21. When the righteous King Josiah endeavored to lead his nation back to God, he knew he had to destroy the altars of Molech. He desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire to Molech. Molech was associated with the darkest of sins, the sacrifice of human beings, and in particular, the sacrifice of children. Even darker, Molech is associated with the sacrifice of children by their parents. Some theorize that Molech was another form of Baal, since he too is spoken of as receiving children as sacrifices. But even if there was anything to any of these theories, the act and practice of sacrificing children is of a demonic realm, so uniquely of its own category and nature that the name Molech stands uniquely on its own. Child sacrifice was part of the rites and worship of the pagan people and cultures that surrounded the Israelites. So when the Israelites turned away from God, they turned to the ways of the gods. They began offering up their children. The prophet Jeremiah would confront the depths of their fall from God and the gruesome sin they were now partaking in and celebrating. The people of Israel and Judah have done nothing but evil in my sight from their youth. Indeed, the people of Israel have done nothing but provoke me with what their hands have made, declares the Lord. From the day it was built until now, this city has so aroused my anger and wrath that I must remove it from my sight. The people of Israel and Judah have provoked me by all the evil they have done. They, their kings and officials, their priests and prophets, the men of Judah and the people of Jerusalem, they turned their backs to me and not their faces. Though I taught them again and again, they would not listen or respond to discipline. They set up their abominable idols in the house that bears my name and defiled it. They built high places for Baal in the valley of Ben Hinnom to sacrifice their sons and daughters to Molech, though I never commanded, nor did it enter my mind that they should do such a detestable thing and so make Judah sin. Jeremiah 32:30 through 35. In the case of the pagan world, it was the result of God's absence. In the case of Israel, it was the result of turning from God's presence. And yet, contrary to what we might expect, the practice was not unique or exceptional. Rather, it was nearly universal. It could be found in the temples of ancient Egypt to the shrines of Tahiti, from the altars of Mesopotamia to the hanging trees of Germany, from India to Hawaii, from West Africa to Tibet, from the Aztecs to the Celts, from the Druids to the Mongolians, and among countless other peoples in countless other lands. The biblical view of children and the weak could not have been more different than that of the pagan world. From the very opening chapters of the Bible, it was established that human life, whether young or old, male or female, strong or weak, rich or poor, healthy or infirm, was of infinite value. The idea of slaughtering one's children on the altars of the gods was forbidden, abhorrent, and an abomination. The Lord was said to have carried Israel as a father carries his son. Children were now to be viewed as a gift from the Lord. They were thus to be cherished and treasured. Life was to be treated as precious and sacred from the moment of conception. So in the Psalms, King David could write, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Psalms 139, 15 and 16. In the New Testament, the status of the weak, the infirm, or the defenseless was further elevated. Jesus comforted the weak, embraced the outcast, and healed the sick. As for children, their value was elevated to a level previously unknown in human history. He said this, "Let the little children come to me and do not forbid them, for such is the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 19:14. And again, "I say unto you, unless you become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me." Matthew 18, 3 through 5. With the entrance of the gospel into the pagan world, there came an inevitable collision of values over the sanctity of human life. The value of women, the treatment of the weak, the care of the sick, and the worth and protection of children, both born and unborn. It was the Christian faith and the biblical valuing of human life that brought protection to young and unborn children and the definitive end to their large-scale murder. If Molech returned, would he not again require blood and human sacrifice? According to the parable that was read this morning, would not this latter work be worse than his first? And if the ancient destroyer returned, what would happen to the children? It is no accident that after renouncing Christianity, that which would soon be known as the Soviet Union became the first state to legalize the killing of unborn children. It did so in 1920. Soon after coming to power with its legalization of abortion. Years later, out of concerns for population growth, the law would be temporarily reversed before being restored again. It is revealing that it was the godless and anti-Christian Soviet Union that was first in the modern world to revive the ancient horror. In the case of another demonically anti-Christian power of the 20th century, Nazi Germany, the issue of child sacrifice is more complex. The Third Reich was first concerned with the conquest and proliferation of the master race. Therefore, it was opposed to abortions as much as they affected German and Aryan birth rates. But the Nazis were servants of the gods and ministers of human sacrifice. The blood fury came out of their obsession with slaughtering the sons and daughters of others. Molech was especially interested in Jewish children. In ancient times, he had killed thousands of them. Now his spirit would cause 1.5 million of them to perish. As for large-scale reentrance of Molech into Western civilization in the world, that would require a massive and civilizational turning from God. Again, we are brought back to the pivotal decade of the 1960s. We first saw the entrance and workings of Baal, then of Ashtaroth. Now must come Molech, the third pagan god. It began in the late 1960s when a handful of American states opened the door by legalizing the killing of unborn children. Then on January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court legalized the murder of unborn children. Molech had come to America. Molech didn't do it all on his own. He had help. Without Baal laying the groundwork, moving the nation away from its biblical foundation, the idea of taking a human life in the image of God would have been unthinkable. But that foundation had been broken. Further, the idolatry that came with Baal, in which one could forge one's own idol, create one's own God, and fashion one's own truth and values, meant that there was no more truth or absolutes. Each could do as he or she pleased. If one could create one's own truth, one could now destroy the truth that actually existed, as in a human life. the unborn child. Baal had ushered in Ashtaroth, and it was Ashtaroth who ushered in Molech. Her mythologies were filled with unrestrained sexuality that there was no apparent thought of, desire for, or connection to children. Her indulgences led not to life, but to death. Beyond that was the goddess's deeper work. Her sexual revolution had severed sexuality from marriage, husbands from wives, men from fatherhood, and women from motherhood. The most critical bond of life, that of mother and child, had eroded. The natural maternal instinct to save one's child at all costs was weakened and in some cases gone. And so, as in ancient times, little children were now brought by their mothers to the altars of Molech. God had warned ancient Israel that if it turned against his ways, if it turned to the gods, it would end up sacrificing its own children. And so it had. And now so too had America, and so too had the nations of the West. We might ask, what was it that could cause a mother of ancient times to lift the child of her womb to Molech? For one thing, she believed that by doing so, she would obtain the God's favor. Her fields would be fruitful. She would be given prosperity. Her prayers would be given answers, and her life would be blessed. In the modern replaying, what could lead a mother to kill the son or daughter of her womb? And I have to digress here for a minute to tell you that when I've had some of these discussions with people and I try to focus on the baby, the question is always asked to me, what about cases of rape or incest? And I will tell you, I struggle with that situation. I don't know what the correct answer is. So to put it in context, one day I went and I looked up the statistics. The abortions done as a result of rape constitute 1% of the abortions in this country. The ones that eliminate the potential for child deformity because of incest constitute 0.5%. That leaves us with 98.5% that are done for other reasons. The most frequently given answer is that if the child lived, it would hamper the mother's life, her time, her energy, her educational or career prospects, her future earning capabilities. The child would be a burden to her aspirations. Thus, by killing the child, the hindrance and burden would be removed, and she would be in a better position to achieve her goals and attain success and prosperity. In the ancient sacrifice, the child could be pierced, cut, crushed, left to die, and or burned. Burning was so common a feature that the scriptures rebuked the Israelites for causing the children to pass through the fire. In the modern sacrifice, the child was likewise pierced, cut, torn apart, left to die, or through the use of chemical solutions, burned. According to the Greek philosopher Plato, the Carthaginian culture viewed child sacrifice this way. With us, for instance, human sacrifice is not legal, but unholy, whereas the Carthaginians perform it as a thing they account holy and legal. So the Carthaginians not only legalized the practice, they deemed it as holy. Even this ancient dynamic was replayed in America and the modern world. The killing of an unborn child was not only legal, but was hallowed as sacred, as a sacred rite to be praised, celebrated, and venerated as something beautiful and sacrosanct. The following are some of the actual words spoken by those who sanctify the killing of unborn children. Notice the framing of the act in a religious and spiritual terms, as well as the word sacrifice. Our culture needs new rituals as well as laws to restore abortion to its sacred dimension. Jeanette Paris in The Sacrament of Abortion, page 92. Abortion is a major blessing and a sacrament in the hands of women. Sarah Terzo, in an article, Clinic Owner, Abortion is a Sacrament and Done for the Love of the Baby. NRL News today, April 27, 2016. It is not immoral to choose abortion. It is simply another kind of morality, a pagan one. Paris, The Sacrament of Abortion, page 56. Abortion is a sacrifice. Jeanette Paris, Psychology of Abortion, 2nd edition, page 70. Abortion is a sacred act. The Sacrament of Abortion, page 8. God sent his prophet Jeremiah to the valley of Hinnom, the site of the nation's darkest sins. He had been told to go there to deliver the prophecy of judgment. Hear the word of the Lord, O kings of Judah and the people of Jerusalem. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Listen, I am going to bring a disaster on this place that will make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. For they have forsaken me and made this the place of foreign gods. They have burned sacrifices in it to gods that neither they nor their fathers nor the kings of Judah ever knew. And they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. Jeremiah 19, 3 and 4. It was the valley of Hinnom, the ground that bore witness to the depths to which the nation had descended in its fall from God. It was filled with blood, ashes, and little bones, the evidence of murder. America has its own valley of Hinnom. It is every place in which the nation's unwanted children were put to death. Israel had killed thousands of its sons and daughters. America killed millions. From the time that their murder was legalized in the early 1970s, America had spilled the blood of approximately 1 million children every year. How could it have happened? How could a nation that once prided itself in being Christian, under God, and the moral beacon of the world have fallen into such depths of evil? It happened just as it had to ancient Israel, in a progression of seduction. The spirit of Baal had caused America to believe that departing from God would bring it freedom. The spirit of Ashtaroth had convinced it that if it abandoned its moral safeguards for instant gratification and sexual abandon, it would find fulfillment. The spirit of Molech had promised to grant it the blessings of an unhindered life if it would only allow him to take away its children. When Germany turned away from God and the Christian faith, the powers of hell were unleashed. The result was the murder of 6 million Jews and a world war that would see the perishing of tens of millions. When Russia morphed into the Soviet Union and turned away from God and the Christian faith, the result was again the murder of tens of millions of people. When America began turning away from God and the Christian faith, the result was the murder of over 60 million children. The removing of God, and in particular, the Christian faith, is a most dangerous thing. Taking all of these into consideration, is it really such a stretch for us to believe what Revelation 13 says? Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Now, there are people who are a lot smarter than I am, theologians and biblical scholars who have compared the time prophecies of Daniel and the beast prophecies of Revelation, and they have identified this beast as the United States of America. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great miracles, great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak, and caused all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Revelation 13, 11 through 15. I realize that this series has been somewhat dark and depressing, especially if we focus on those things. But for those of us who still profess Christianity, all is not lost. We can hold on to the hope in the final words of John the Revelator. He which testifieth these things saith, surely I come quickly. Amen. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. Revelation 22:20.